today we have Amy and Blair Debrucque joining us, and I'm so glad that you're both here. The mother-daughter resemblance is just striking. So first, tell us just a little bit about yourselves, what you like to do, where you're from, what motivates you, things like that, just so people who don't know you can get a chance to know you better.
I guess I'll start, but we do have some similarities. We both are addicted to chocolate, but we're both working on that. We're both working on that.
Work in progress.
Work in progress. Not totally giving that up, but I am a writer. I love to write. That started later for me. I stayed home with the kids when they were younger. But there's four. Blair's just one of four. And I was telling Candace before we hit record, their older kids are starting to trickle back in from being away, which is nice for the summer. My youngest is especially grateful that it's not just her and her father and I and her. So she's happy to see some siblings. But so yeah, this summer, I think we're just kind of taking it all in with family time and doing all of that. But I have the podcast Life on Purpose and writing. And then Blair and I together wrote our first book, Embolden. But
yeah, I am probably more of a reader. I read a lot. So where my mom is definitely very talented in writing, I'll read whatever she writes because I like reading. But I live with my two brothers in Washington, and I'm going to hopefully going to school for speech therapy. So I did some of my prereqs this year and just kind of had the opportunity to hang out with them and still live together, but live somewhere without, the parents were the adults, right? I guess the three of us. So that's been fun to do this year.
Absolutely. It's fun when you get to live with your siblings as adults because not everyone gets that experience, and it's a little bit different, and it's just kind of a special time. But I do love too that you said that you're more of a reader, because I think to be a good writer, you have to be a good reader first. I don't know if you've seen that's helped, and that helped when you were writing together or not. But
I definitely think so. I think she undermines because writing isn't her natural draw, but I definitely agree with you, Candace. I think that because she is such an avid reader, she adds a different level of perspective in what she put into the book.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was so excited knowing that I was going to get to chat with y'all today, and I started thinking about all these great mother-daughter duos that we have, and one of the first that comes to mind is Goldie Hawn and Kate Hudson, and then we have, of course, for Pixar fans, there's Mrs. Incredible and Violet. And then one of my favorites, just being a Southern girl myself, is Steel Magnolias. We have Millen and Shelby, and of course the Freaky Friday switcheroo with Tess and Anna. But I just think it's so cool that the two of you get to share this purpose and actually write a book together. And so I'm curious just to learn more, how do you two connect? Because I know some of our listeners maybe, want to strengthen a relationship with a family member. And so I'd love to hear your perspective on that. And then two, hear what was it like to write a book together? Because sometimes doing a family project, I don't know, renovating something in the house, it's it brings out the worst in me. But, what was that like working on this together?
You want me to start or you want to start?
You can start if you want.
I think, we definitely had that moment. But part of that, I think, is just, like you said, is kind of learning how to take the relationship to a different level other than just, me being her parent and her responding as child to the mother, you know what I mean? So it was a nice transition into adulthood. Really. There were times that were difficult. I mean, at the time she was in the thick of doing her undergrad. She was living in Rochester when she was at college. And so that was challenging in and of itself. We were on two different timelines. I had deadlines and she's just kind of learning this process. And so, but we were able to, I think, work through them pretty good. And I think we would both agree, and I'll let Blair speak on this more, is that when the process finished, and sometimes when we had those intense sessions when she was able to be home on break or something, that's where we saw the breakthroughs, I think, in our relationship, is that we could appreciate where each other was coming from. Because we are at different ages and stages, and we also had other priorities going on, but we were able, I think, to really kind of acknowledge how to work together and why it was important to, I think, be less just self-centered, thinking about our own needs and our own stuff with the book, and really have to look at each other's perspective. So I think that was a really huge thing, at least for me.
Yeah. Easier said than done.
Easier said than done. Yeah.
I think in the, obviously once it was all wrapped up and it was finished, we could definitely kind of like the light at the end of the tunnel. We could see how much, I think, growth that we had in just our personal relationship, and then with what we kind of found through the book. But like my mom was saying, we had at the time I had like school deadlines, which I was thinking at the time was, like the most important thing. And then mom had writing deadlines and things with, the book that had to be done. So it was definitely nice, because it's always good to learn to look at what other people are doing and focus a little bit more on their priorities and their perspective, instead of just kind of focused on what you're doing and what you have to get done. So I think any learning opportunity is great, but it was definitely up and down to get to that point, and probably see that at the end. And
I think to encourage other mother and daughters is to stick it out.
You argue.
Yes. We could pretend that it was all like, it was the best thing ever. And, we just came together, and it was like, but the reality is it was stressful at times, and we got on each other's nerves at times. But if you stick it out, and we both had a goal, I think that was the thing. We both knew we wanted to create this resource. We both thought it had huge value and importance. And I think if you stick with the end goal, everything else just kind of works its way out, and it did.
Yeah. So maybe a strong goal would be
whatever that is. And it doesn't have to be a book. It could just be something with your relationship, or, I would just say, stick it out. It's worth it.
Yeah. No, that's so good. That's so good. So Amy, I know really what kind of stands out to me when I look at you and when I read your writing is just your confidence and your poise. And I know that like that godly confidence is not something that's just formed, it's not something that just happens. It's something that has to be formed. And so what fears have you really had to overcome to live out this life of purpose that you're now living out so freely?
It's so funny that you say that, because I feel like 10 years or maybe 11 years ago, confidence was not even on my radar. I had so many fears that just overshadowed any confidence that I could pull out. So, to me, it was a whole process. I had to go through a lot of living in fear to really recognize that I needed to surrender those to God. And I think that, that was the turning point for me. For someone else, it might be something different. But mine was always, I wanted one hand on the steering wheel. I wasn't listening to Carrie Underwood's song at that point, apparently. But I wanted to be in total control. And I think even as a believer, when you are a believer, but you still want to be in control, you really can't have both, depending on how far you do want to grow and feel confident in your life. And so, because if you're always relying on it, well, if I do this, then I'll feel more confident, you're kind of taking God out of the equation. And that's what I was doing. I wasn't doing that intentional, but I wasn't intentionally putting him in the control seat either. I was still, like I said, wanted to kind of ride both, and I couldn't, and I didn't for years. And so I had all this fear and anxiety. And then once I was able to, I had a cancer diagnosis 11 years ago. That was kind of the turning point for me to kind of relinquish the control I was hanging on to. And then it was really after that, I think there is a freedom in being able to let go and let God take over. I mean, it's such a cliche and overused phrase, but it is really true when you can totally embrace it. And that was just my complete experience. And so that really started the transformation in feeling confident to be able to, number one, not care if I did fail at something, but I felt like if God was leading me to do it, then the obedience piece was more important than what would happen or what other people might perceive me to be. You know, which is so weird now, but I'm a very private person. She's super private. And we're a very private family. Now, obviously this ministry has changed that, which has been hard in some ways because it feels unnatural. But again, trusting on, you know, that God has me doing this for a bigger purpose than my own pride or ego, is humbling. And I think that's the stuff that keeps me going and feeling more confident, because I'm confident in what he is doing through me. It's nothing that I feel like I'm shedding some major newfound wisdom on women. It's just, I know that if I keep staying obedient to him, that's where I keep becoming more confident in the things that I'm doing.
Well, and I think you hit the nail on the head when you said, like, we can't have control and surrender. You know, we can't have
Right.
both. That's so, so, so true. Um, Blair, I'm curious, knowing that your mom is a cancer survivor, you know, how has that given you courage to face circumstances in your life?
I think seeing that, I think the way more of like the way that I guess my mom looks at it now, I think you can look at something like that in your life either as a really negative thing and just continue to think of it as something really negative and kind of almost walk away from God when things like that happen. But my mom kind of turned it into something where now she's inspiring so many women and helping so many women through you know, something that happened to her that at the time I'm sure did not seem to be all that pleasant, but kind of turned it into this thing like, you know, you need to give up control, and when you do, it can be so much more freeing and I guess a better way to live your life more, she says, live your life more on purpose, and you know, it frees you in that way. So I guess just when I have things going on, I try to look at them the same way that she does, and that it's, you know, God has kind of a purpose for everything, and at the time you may not see what it's going to look like, but you just have to keep trusting him. Just take your hands off the wheels and just let him.
That takes so much courage, you know, to be able to let go of the control. You know, I think sometimes when I think of courage, I think of like two different lions. Like there's the lion from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, like Aslan, and there's just like this strength and this might, but there's this undeniable gentleness too, you know. And I think that godly courage, it definitely has that. It becomes great through the gentleness, you know. And I think we see that even in just what you've shared is it's that vulnerability, you know, that living more of that private life, but having the courage to speak to it, you know, like that's God's courage coming through you. And then sometimes, though, I think I feel more like the lion on the Wizard of Oz, you know, and I'm, you know, lacking courage, you know, just from insecurity. And sometimes it's grief or heartache, you know, that we've gone through that we will feel a lack of courage. And then sometimes it's just that we've forgotten whose we are.
Right.
And so I'm curious, you know, have you experienced this, and in what ways have you learned to have courage and just embolden others to have courage, whether it's in good times or hard times? And, you know, what does that look like?
I think it's just a matter of also listening. It just depends on what the situation is. I think a lot of times, and I don't know, I don't want to say especially Christian women, but I think we always feel like we need to say something profound. And sometimes I think, at least with the friends that we've had that have gone through hard things, and just from my experience alone, in knowing when you feel like you want people to just listen and not respond. I think listening is a big one. I think coming alongside someone doesn't always mean you have to be saying and doing a lot, but maybe just sitting